Part 1. The Unnamed Armada. The Vaeltari Empire had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. 9 elder species had built it together, and over the centuries they had swallowed every civilization they found. Some joined willingly. Most did not. But in the end, it did not matter. The Empire always won. Their fleets were massive, their technology was ancient and refined, and their emperor, High Sovereign Dral Vathan, ruled from a command citadel the size of a small moon. No one challenged him. No one dared. So when the long-range sensor arrays along the outer sovereignty corridor picked up something strange, the officers on duty assumed it was a mistake. The readings showed a fleet, a large one, moving through a region of dark space that had never been mapped. Over 800 ships, traveling in tight formation, heading straight toward Imperial territory. The readings were checked, then checked again, then sent up the chain of command until they landed on the desk of Fleet Admiral Korath, the most powerful military officer in the Empire. Korath was old, even by Vaeltari standards. He had fought in 30 campaigns and crushed rebellions on dozens of worlds. He had never seen a sensor reading he could not explain. Until now. He brought it to the War Council. The council chamber was a vast circular room at the heart of the Imperial Citadel. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing every corner of the Empire in real time. The chiefs of every major military division sat in their assigned seats, their faces lit by the blue glow of the projections. At the center, on a raised throne carved from the bones of a dead world, sat High Sovereign Dral Vathan. He was enormous, even for a Vaeltari. His 4 eyes moved slowly across the room, and when he spoke, every voice went silent. Korath activated the sensor feed. The holographic display shifted to show the unknown fleet. 812 vessels, moving in a staggered formation that suggested discipline and training. The ships were angular and heavily armored, coated in some kind of composite material that scattered the Empire's scanning beams. Their engine signatures did not match anything in the Imperial database. Their communication frequencies were encrypted in ways the Empire's best codebreakers could not crack. "Who commands that fleet?" High Sovereign Dral Vathan asked. His voice was low and calm, but there was an edge to it that everyone in the room recognized. No one answered, because no one knew. Korath tried to fill the silence with analysis. The fleet was heading toward the Morellian border, where 3 vassal worlds had recently been placed under a military blockade. The Morellians, a peaceful amphibian species who had served the Empire for 3,000 years, had committed the unforgivable crime of requesting fair trade terms. The Empire had responded by cutting off all food and medical shipments. Billions were starving. It was standard Imperial policy. Obedience through suffering. The unknown fleet appeared to be heading directly for that blockade. 12,000 light-years away, aboard a ship called the USS Steadfast, Admiral Kevin Holt stood at the bridge command rail and watched the stars pass on the forward display. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with gray at his temples and a calm, steady voice that never seemed to rise, no matter how bad things got. He had served in the United Earth Naval Command for 30 years, starting as a junior officer on a patrol frigate and working his way up through every rank the hard way. He did not shout. He thought, he planned, and then he acted. Beside him, his executive officer, Commander Laura Beckett, sat at her console, reviewing the latest tactical data. Beckett was 10 years younger than Holt, sharp-eyed and precise, with a reputation for seeing problems before they became disasters. She had been hand-picked by Holt for this mission because he trusted her judgment more than anyone else in the fleet. "We are being scanned," Beckett said, her eyes moving across the readouts. "At least 14 different systems are trying to get a look at us right now. They are not being quiet about it. Holt nodded slowly. Let them look. We did not come here to hide. Behind the Steadfast, the rest of Earth's first expeditionary armada stretched out across the darkness of space. Cruisers, destroyers, carrier groups, electronic warfare ships, and supply vessels, all holding formation with a precision that came from 6 years of relentless training. Every man and woman in that fleet had volunteered for this mission. Every one of them knew they were heading into the unknown. And every one of them had decided that it was worth it. It had all started 19 years ago, when a crashed alien probe had been pulled from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The probe was Veilthari in origin, part of a long-range survey mission that had malfunctioned and fallen to Earth. The technology inside it had changed everything. Within 5 years, humanity had reverse-engineered faster-than-light travel. Within 10, they had developed energy shields and weapons systems that matched or exceeded Imperial standards. Within 15, they had built a fleet in absolute secrecy, hidden in shipyards buried inside hollowed-out asteroids beyond the orbit of Neptune. And while they built, they watched. They intercepted Imperial broadcasts. They learned alien languages. They mapped trade routes and military deployments. They studied the Empire's tactics, its strengths, and its weaknesses. A young lieutenant named Danny Greer, a quiet kid from Ohio with a gift for languages, had spent 4 years learning every dialect of Veilthari Common Tongue just by listening to intercepted transmissions. They learned about the Morellians. They learned about the blockade. They learned that billions of innocent beings were being starved to death because they had asked to be treated fairly. And Earth made a decision. No one had asked humanity for help. No one even knew humanity existed. But Kevin Holt had sat in a briefing room on Earth and watched footage of Morellian children too weak to stand, and he had looked around the table at the other officers and seen the same thing in every pair of eyes. Not anger. Something quieter than anger. Something harder. Resolve. President Claire Dunham had authorized the mission personally. She had stood in front of the United Earth Council and made her case in plain language. We have the power to help. We have the ships, the people, and the will. If we sit here and do nothing while billions die, then what exactly did we build all of this for? The vote was unanimous. Now the fleet was 3 days from the Morellian system, and the Empire had finally noticed them. Holt was not surprised. He had expected to be detected sooner, honestly. But it did not change the plan. He turned to Lieutenant Greer, who sat at the communication station near the back of the bridge. Danny, when we arrive, I want you ready to broadcast on every Imperial frequency. I want them to hear us in their own language. Clear and polite. Greer looked up from his console and nodded. Yes, sir. What do you want me to say? Holt looked back at the stars on the forward display. Somewhere ahead, behind a wall of warships, 3 worlds full of people were waiting for someone to care. Tell them who we are, Holt said quietly, and tell them to move. Part 5. The Answer. The news of Grand Admiral Zorath's defeat did not travel through the galaxy. It exploded. For 12,000 years, the Veilthari Empire had been unbeatable. Every species in the known galaxy understood this the way they understood gravity or the coldness of space. It was not an opinion. It was a fact. The Empire had crushed every rebellion, absorbed every rival, and erased every challenger. Their grand fleets were the final word in every argument, and Grand Admiral Zorath was the sharpest edge of that blade. A commander who had never known defeat in a career that spanned centuries. And now he was a prisoner. His fleet was shattered. His ceremonial sword, a relic of 4,000 years of unbroken military tradition, had been handed to a human woman half his size in the bridge of his own flagship. The Empire tried to control the story. Official broadcasts called the battle a minor border skirmish with an unrecognized species, claiming that Imperial forces had withdrawn voluntarily to avoid unnecessary casualties. But the real recordings were already everywhere. Resistance networks, smugglers, and independent news channels carried the full unedited footage of the battle to every corner of the galaxy. The images of burning Imperial dreadnoughts, of human drones swarming through the Valthari formation, of Colonel Vance standing on the bridge of the Throne of Silence with Zorat's sword in her hand. These images could not be unseen or unheard. The galaxy watched, and then the galaxy moved. The Kethrani were first. They were a tall, powerful species with 4 arms and a warrior tradition that stretched back further than the Empire itself. 6 centuries ago, the Valthari had conquered their homeworld and destroyed every weapon they owned, disarming an entire civilization to prevent any future challenge. The Kethrani had never forgotten. They had hidden weapons in deep caves, in underwater vaults, in sealed chambers beneath their oldest temples. Generations of Kethrani had guarded those secrets, waiting for a day that most of them had stopped believing would ever come. 3 days after the battle at Morellian space, the Kethrani opened their vaults. Within a week, their homeworld was free. The Peleshi followed. They were a small, quiet species with an extraordinary talent for engineering and science. The Empire had enslaved them to maintain its infrastructure, its power grids, its communication networks, its shipyards, its factories. The Peleshi had no weapons and no military tradition, but they had something far more dangerous: knowledge. They knew exactly how the Empire's systems worked, because they were the ones who kept them running. On the same day, across 230 Imperial worlds, every Peleshi worker simply stopped. They put down their tools, turned off their consoles, and walked away. It was the quietest revolution in the history of the galaxy, and it was devastating. Within 2 weeks, the Empire's logistics network was in collapse. Shipyards could not build. Factories could not produce. Communication relays went dark, one by one, like stars going out. Then came the Durathi, a species of traders and diplomats who severed all commercial ties with the Empire and opened their ports to free species. The Seluni, a race of deep-sea beings, destroyed the underwater mining platforms that the Empire had forced them to operate for generations. The Vresh, a proud avian species, reclaimed their skies and tore down every Imperial installation on their world. Species after species, world after world, the Empire's subjects looked at what humanity had done and found inside themselves the courage that fear had buried for thousands of years. President Claire Dunham authorized the deployment of the 2nd and 3rd Expeditionary Armadas, bringing humanity's total forward-deployed military strength to over 2,000 ships. But the ships were only part of it. Alongside the warships came transport vessels carrying diplomats, aid workers, teachers, doctors, engineers, and builders. Humanity had not crossed the stars to conquer. It had crossed the stars to help. Admiral Holt, operating from a permanent forward headquarters in the Morellian system, found himself at the center of something much larger than a military campaign. Species he had never heard of were sending representatives to meet with him. Former vassal worlds were requesting human assistance in rebuilding their governments, their economies, their schools. Commander Page, the intelligence chief, was spending more time coordinating diplomatic meetings than analyzing enemy fleet movements. Holt did not pretend to be a politician. He was a sailor, and he knew it. But he understood something that most politicians did not: that trust was not built with speeches, it was built with actions. So he kept the humanitarian missions running. He kept the food flowing. He kept the engineers repairing and the doctors healing. And when alien representatives came to talk, he listened more than he spoke. Over the following months, the framework of something new began to take shape. Holt worked with Page, with Beckett, and with a growing team of human and alien advisors to draft the founding charter of what would become known as the Free Systems Compact. It was not an empire. It had no emperor, no supreme authority, and no hierarchy based on species or strength. Decisions were made by consensus. Every member species had an equal voice and an equal vote. Membership was voluntary. No one was punished for staying out. Captain Whitfield oversaw the creation of a joint defense force, training alien pilots alongside human ones. Captain Dawson established shared patrol routes along the former Imperial borders. Captain Marshall helped design standardized trade protocols that ensured fair pricing and open markets. Colonel Vance, to everyone's surprise, including her own, became the Compact's most effective ambassador. Not because she was diplomatic, but because when she gave her word, everyone believed it. The Veilthari Empire, fractured and weakened, attempted one final move. High Sovereign Dralvothen requested a direct audience with the human commander. It was not a demand. For the first time in his long and terrible reign, it was a request. The meeting took place aboard a neutral station in deep space, a decommissioned trading post that had been chosen precisely because it belonged to no one. Representatives from 26 species attended as observers. The station's docking bays were crowded with ships from a dozen different civilizations, all watching to see what would happen when the ruler of the old galaxy met the man who had broken his grip on it. Holt arrived in his dress uniform, flanked by Beckett and Vance. Dralvathen arrived in ceremonial robes that shimmered with colors that human eyes could barely perceive. He was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 eyes that moved independently, each one tracking a different part of the room. He carried himself with the weight of 12,000 years of authority, and even now, diminished and cornered, he radiated a power that made the air feel heavy. They sat across from each other at a simple table. No thrones, no elaborate displays, just 2 chairs and a flat surface between them. Dralvathen studied Holt for a long moment. The human was not impressive by Veilthari standards. He was small, soft-skinned, and fragile. His lifespan was barely a flicker compared to a Veilthari's. And yet this creature had done what no being in the galaxy had done in 12 millennia. He had broken the Empire. Not with tricks, not with some secret weapon, but by showing up, fighting with terrifying skill, and then feeding the people he had come to save. "You have destroyed the order of this galaxy," Dralvathen said. His voice was deep and resonant, filling the room even through the translation systems. 12,000 years of stability, of structure, of peace. You have torn it apart in less than 1 cycle. Holt was quiet for a moment. He looked at the old emperor with eyes that held neither hatred nor triumph. When he spoke, his voice was the same voice that had guided his fleet through 2 battles, that had comforted frightened officers, that had spoken gently to Morellian children who had never seen a human before. "With respect, High Sovereign, what you call peace was silence. What you call stability was fear. You built your empire on the backs of species who had no choice, and you called it order. But it was not order. It was a cage, and the only ones who could not see the bars were the ones holding the keys." Dralvathen's 4 eyes narrowed. "And what do you offer in its place? Chaos? War? How long before your compact falls apart? Before your alliance crumbles under the weight of 100 different species pulling in 100 different directions?" Holt leaned forward slightly. "Maybe it will. Maybe it will be messy and difficult and imperfect. But it will be chosen. Every species in the compact is there because they want to be, not because they are afraid. And that is the difference between what you built and what we are trying to build. You ruled by fear. We are asking people to stand together by choice." The room was very quiet. 26 species held their breath. Dralvathen sat still for a long time. Then he asked the question. The same question that had been asked in the War Council chamber when the first sensor readings came in. The same question that had been whispered in the corridors of the Citadel, screamed in the burning bridges of Imperial warships, murmured in the refugee camps and resistance hideouts of 100 occupied worlds. Who are you? Kevin Holt, son of a schoolteacher from Kansas and a retired Navy mechanic. A man who had grown up fixing truck engines in a gravel driveway and reading history books by flashlight. An admiral who had crossed the stars not for glory or territory, but because he could not look at suffering and do nothing. Kevin Holt looked the ruler of the galaxy in the eye. "We are Earth's," he said, "and we are here to stay." Behind him, through the station's observation windows, the ships of the First Expeditionary Armada held formation in the starlight, silent, steady, unbroken. And all around them, for the first time in 12,000 years, the galaxy was free. Part 4. The Siege of Myrelian Space. Grand Admiral Zorath arrived 12 days later, with 1,600 warships. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Myrelian system in a single massive wave, a wall of metal and fire that stretched across the sensor displays like a dark cloud rolling over a horizon. Battleships, dreadnoughts, heavy cruisers, assault carriers, and hundreds of support vessels, all arranged in the Empire's signature crescent formation, designed to envelop an enemy from three sides and crush them in a single, overwhelming strike. Zorath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Throne of Silence, and studied the tactical display with the patience of a predator that had never once been prey. He was not like Selthan. He did not underestimate his enemies. He had watched the recordings of the first battle dozens of times, studying the human tactics, noting their speed, their coordination, and their willingness to split their forces and attack from multiple angles. He respected what they had done, but respect did not change the math. He had twice their numbers, heavier ships, and more firepower than any fleet assembled in the last 1,000 years. "Begin the advance," Zorath ordered. "Standard assault formation. All ships maintain spacing and hold fire until optimal range." The Imperial Armada moved forward like a tide. On the Steadfast, Commander Beckett watched the sensor feeds and felt her stomach tighten. 1,600 ships. The numbers filled the display like a red flood. She took a breath, steadied herself, and began calling out positions and vectors to the fleet. Admiral Holt stood at the command rail, his hands resting lightly on the metal surface, his face calm. He had prepared for it, and now it was here. "All battle groups, this is the Admiral," he said on the fleet-wide channel. His voice was quiet, steady, and carried the kind of certainty that made frightened people believe things might be okay. "You all know the plan. You all know your jobs. Stay sharp, stay together, and trust the people beside you. We have something they do not. We have each other. Holt out." He turned to Beckett. "Execute Phase 1. The human fleet did not advance to meet the enemy. Instead, they fell back. Slowly, deliberately, the entire armada pulled away from the outer system and retreated toward the inner planets, drawing the Veilthari fleet deeper into the system. To Zorath, it looked like fear. It looked like a smaller force trying to buy time before the inevitable. It was a trap. The outer system had been seeded with over 10,000 autonomous mines during the 12 days of preparation. They floated silently among the asteroids, invisible to standard scanning frequencies, each one loaded with enough explosive force to crack a cruiser in half. Captain Dawson's destroyer teams had placed them with surgical precision, mapping the most likely approach vectors and creating kill zones that funneled the advancing fleet into narrow corridors of death. Zorath's leading ships entered the first minefield at full advance speed. The mines activated in sequence, detonating in waves that rippled through the Imperial formation like hammer blows. 80 ships were destroyed in the first 3 minutes. Another 200 took damage ranging from minor to crippling. The crescent formation buckled as captains tried to dodge debris and burning wreckage. Zorath was furious, but he was not beaten. He ordered his fleet to push through the minefield, accepting the losses as the cost of engagement. His ships cleared the outer system and entered the middle zone, where the human fleet had been moments before. But the humans were gone. In their place were hundreds of sensor-reflective decoys, unmanned platforms that mimicked the energy signatures of human warships. Captain Whitfield's technical teams had deployed them in patterns that made them look like a fleet 3 times the size of the actual armada. Zorath's sensor officers suddenly reported thousands of enemy contacts spreading across the system in every direction. The Imperial fleet fractured. Individual captains, unable to distinguish real ships from fakes on their sensors, began engaging phantom targets. Zorath shouted orders to regroup, but the electronic warfare suites aboard Whitfield's carriers were flooding the Imperial communication frequencies with static and false signals. His commands were reaching only half his fleet. The rest were fighting shadows. That was when Holtz struck. The 5 human battle groups emerged simultaneously from behind the system's gas giant, where they had been hiding in the planet's magnetic field to mask their energy signatures. They hit the scattered Imperial fleet from 5 different directions at the same time, and the effect was devastating. Captain Marshall's cruiser division opened fire first, targeting the densest cluster of Imperial ships with concentrated railgun salvos. The electromagnetic accelerators hurled solid tungsten projectiles at velocities that turned simple metal into the most destructive force the Vilthari had ever encountered. Hull plating that could withstand plasma bombardment for hours was punched through in an instant. Ships that had survived 1,000 battles were torn apart by weapons that had no energy signature, no heat bloom, and no warning. Captain Dawson's destroyers drove into the gaps between the Imperial formations, moving fast and hitting hard, their smaller frames darting between the massive Vilthari battleships like wolves among cattle. They targeted engines and sensor arrays, crippling ships without destroying them, creating drifting obstacles that blocked the movement of the ships behind them. Captain Whitfield launched her full strike package, 600 unmanned combat drones equipped with electronic warfare payloads and precision munitions. The drones swarmed through the Imperial formation, jamming communications, blinding sensors, and delivering pinpoint strikes against weapon systems and shield generators. Imperial gunners could not track them. They were too small, too fast, and there were too many. Commander Beckett ran the battle from the Combat Information Center like a conductor leading an orchestra. Every human ship in the fleet was connected through a networked command system that shared sensor data, targeting information, and tactical updates in real time. When a Vilthari battleship turned to engage one battle group, Beckett redirected another to hit it from behind. When an opening appeared in the Imperial line, she pushed ships through it before the gap could close. The entire human armada fought as a single mind, adapting and shifting faster than the rigid Vilthari hierarchy could respond. The battle raged for 6 hours. Zorath was a better commander than Selthan. He was smarter, faster, and more willing to take risks. Twice he managed to rally his scattered forces and launch coordinated counterattacks that nearly broke the human defensive line. The second attempt was the closest. A group of 40 Imperial dreadnoughts punched through the center of the human formation, and for 20 terrible minutes the Steadfast itself came under direct fire. Holt's shields dropped to 15% before Marshall's cruisers arrived to drive the dreadnoughts back. But in the end, the Vilthari could not overcome the fundamental problem. Their fleet was designed to fight enemies that stood still and traded blows. The humans never stood still. They moved, they adapted, they changed tactics in the middle of an engagement, and they fought with a creativity that the Imperial military machine simply could not match. It was Colonel Vance who ended it. While the main battle raged, Vance had been waiting. Her marine assault teams were loaded into 12 stealth transports, hidden in the shadow of the gas giant, engines cold, running on minimal power. She had watched the battle unfold on her tactical display with the patience of a hunter lying in a blind, waiting for the perfect moment. When Zorath committed his reserves to the second counterattack, and the Throne of Silence moved forward from its protected position in the rear, Vance saw her opening. "All teams, go," she said. The 12 transports lit their engines and crossed the distance to the Imperial flagship in 9 minutes. Veilthari point defense systems, overwhelmed by drone swarms and electronic interference, did not detect them until they were already docking against the hull. Vance's Marines breached the outer hull in 4 locations simultaneously and pushed inward. The fighting inside the Throne of Silence was fast and brutal. Veilthari security troops were large, strong, and well-armed, but they fought as individuals. The human Marines fought as teams, covering each other, communicating constantly, and moving through the massive alien corridors with a speed and coordination that turned every engagement into a mismatch. Vance led the primary assault team herself, pushing through 3 security checkpoints and a sealed blast door in under 6 minutes. When she reached the bridge, Grand Admiral Zorath was standing alone at his command console. His officers had fled or surrendered. His tactical display showed his fleet in full collapse. Ships were surrendering, scattering, or simply drifting without power. Zorath looked at Vance. She was covered in dust and breathing hard, her rifle raised, her team fanning out behind her. She was half his size. He reached to his belt and drew his ceremonial sword, a weapon that had been in his family for 40 generations, a symbol of command that had never been yielded to an enemy in 4,000 years. He held it out to her, hilt first, and said nothing. Vance took it. Then she looked him in the eye and said, "Your wounded will be treated. Your crew will be fed. You have my word." Zorath blinked his 4 eyes slowly. He had expected death. He had not expected this. That night, Admiral Holt stood alone in his quarters and looked at a photograph of his daughter. The fleet had lost 29 ships and 412 sailors. Every name was already carved into his memory. He held the photograph with both hands, and his fingers were trembling for the first time since the battle began. "We held," he whispered. H1, Part 3, The Galaxy Learns a Name. The story spread faster than light. Smugglers carried it first. Independent traders who operated on the fringes of Veilthari space picked up the transmissions, the battle recordings, and the images. They passed them to other traders, who passed them to resistance networks, who broadcast them on every open and hidden frequency in the galaxy. Within a week, there was not a single inhabited system in the Empire that had not heard what happened at the Morellian blockade. The details were almost impossible to believe. An unknown fleet, belonging to an unknown species, had appeared from an uncharted region of space. They had destroyed an Imperial blockade force in less than an hour. They had captured a Veilthari Vice Admiral alive. And this was the part that confused everyone the most. They had delivered food to the starving civilians on the surface and asked for nothing in return. Every empire in the history of the galaxy had operated on the same basic principle. You conquered, you took, and you ruled. It was the natural order of things. The strong ate the weak. Even the species that opposed the Veilthari Empire understood this. They did not object to the concept of empire. They only objected to not being the ones in charge. But these newcomers had done something that no species in recorded galactic history had ever done. They had fought a battle, won decisively, and then spent their first hours in a foreign star system feeding other people's children. The Myrelians broadcast everything. They were a gentle, quiet people who had spent 3,000 years under the Empire's heel, and now they were shouting to anyone who would listen. They sent images of human soldiers unloading cargo containers on landing pads. They sent footage of human medics setting up field hospitals and treating the sick and the malnourished. They sent recordings of human engineers working alongside Morellian technicians to repair the water purification systems that the blockade had caused to fail. One image in particular spread across the galaxy like fire. It showed a human marine, a young woman with her helmet under one arm, kneeling in the mud outside a Morellian settlement. She was holding a small amphibian child on her knee, and both of them were laughing. The marine's rifle was slung across her back, forgotten. The child was reaching up to touch the strange creature's face with tiny webbed fingers. That image appeared on information screens in 100 star systems. Subjugated species who had never heard the word human before saw it, and felt something they had not felt in a very long time. Hope. On the Imperial Command Citadel, the mood was very different. The War Council had watched the battle recordings in silence. When the playback ended, no one spoke for nearly a full minute. Fleet Admiral Korath stood at the display controls with his hands at his sides, his face unreadable. The other chiefs shifted in their seats, glancing at each other, waiting for someone else to speak first. High Sovereign Dralvathan sat on his throne and stared at the empty display. His 4 eyes blinked slowly, one pair at a time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than anyone in the room had ever heard it. "Find out everything about them," he said. "Everything. Where they come from, what they want, how many of them there are, and prepare Grand Admiral Zorath's fleet for deployment. I want those worlds back, and I want that alien commander brought to me in chains." The orders went out within the hour. The Empire's intelligence networks activated across the galaxy, searching for any trace of the species that called itself human. Grand Admiral Zorath, the most feared military commander in the Empire's history, began assembling a fleet that would dwarf the one that had just been destroyed. Back in the Myrelian system, Admiral Holt knew all of this was coming. He had not expected the Empire to simply accept what had happened and walk away. He had won a battle, not a war, and the real fight had not even started yet. He called a senior staff meeting aboard the Steadfast. The flag briefing room was a simple, functional space. A long table, a holographic projector, and chairs that were designed for comfort during long sessions. Commander Beckett arrived first, as she always did, with a data pad full of fleet status reports. Captain Whitfield came next, still in her flight suit, her hair pulled back and her eyes sharp. Captain Dawson sat down with a cup of coffee and a tired grin. Captain Marshall took his seat quietly, nodding to the others. Colonel Vance entered last, her boots still muddy from the surface, and sat down without a word. Commander Aaron Page, the fleet's intelligence chief, was already setting up his presentation at the holographic projector. Holt stood at the head of the table and looked at each of them in turn. These were the people who had just won humanity's first interstellar battle. They did not look like legends. They looked tired. "The Empire is going to send everything they have," Holt said, keeping his voice even. "Page, what are we looking at?" Commander Page activated the projector. A map of the surrounding space appeared, with Imperial fleet positions marked in red. Based on intercepted communications and known Vialthari deployment patterns, we can expect a response fleet of between 500 and 2,000 warships. The most likely commander is Grand Admiral Zorath. He has never lost a battle. "Neither have we," Dawson said from behind his coffee cup. A few people smiled, but the weight of the numbers hung in the air. 800 human ships against a possible 2,000. And reinforcements from Earth were at least 3 weeks away. "We cannot run," Holt said. "If we leave, the Morellians pay the price. Everything we just did becomes meaningless. So we stay, and we prepare this system for defense." Colonel Vance leaned forward. "Then we dig in. We mine the approaches, set up decoy fields, and turn this system into a fortress. They want to come in here, They pay for every kilometer. Captain Whitfield nodded. My carrier group can deploy autonomous drone swarms as a screening force. We can give them thousands of false targets to chase before they even reach our main line. Captain Marshall spoke carefully, as he always did. Our railguns gave us a significant advantage in the last fight. The Veilthari have no defense against kinetic weapons at the velocities we can achieve. But we need to be smart about ammunition. We are a long way from any resupply. Commander Beckett looked up from her datapad. I have been studying the Veilthari command structure. It is rigid, top-down, and centralized. Their admirals control everything. Lower officers do not improvise, do not adapt, and do not deviate from orders. If we can disrupt their command chain during a battle, their fleet will lose coherence. Holt nodded slowly. This was why he had picked these people. Every one of them was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Here is what we are going to do, he said. We are going to turn this system into something the Veilthari have never seen before. We are going to use every trick, every tactic, and every advantage we have. And when they come, and they will come, we are going to show them that the first fight was not a mistake. He paused and looked around the table one more time. We are also going to keep feeding the Morellians. We are going to keep treating their sick. We are going to keep repairing their infrastructure. Because that is why we are here. Not to prove we can fight, to prove that fighting means something. The meeting lasted another 2 hours as they worked through the details. Mine placements, decoy deployments, patrol schedules, communication protocols, supply rationing. 100 small decisions that would determine whether 800 ships and their crews lived or died. When it was over, Holt walked alone to the observation deck at the top of the Steadfast. Through the wide windows, he could see the lights of the fleet spread out across the darkness. Hundreds of ships, each one full of people who had left everything behind to come here. Somewhere below, on the surface of the nearest Morellian world, lights were coming back on in cities that had been dark for months. Human engineers had gotten the power grid running again. Holt could see the faint glow against the planet's night side, and it was the most beautiful thing he had seen in a long time. He did not know if they would survive what was coming, but he knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic, that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Part 2. First Contact Through Gunfire. The Veilthari blockade around the Morellian worlds was not small. 150 warships hung in orbit like a ring of iron, their weapons pointed downward at the 3 planets below and outward at the empty space around them. The ships were old by Imperial standards, but they were still powerful, heavy cruisers and assault frigates, bristling with plasma cannons and torpedo bays. For 3 months they had sat there, letting nothing in and nothing out, while the people on the surface slowly starved. Vice Admiral Selthen commanded the blockade from his flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Wrath of Sovereignty. Selthen was not a complicated man. He enjoyed power, he enjoyed obedience, and he enjoyed watching lesser species suffer for their mistakes. The Morellians had dared to ask for better trade terms, and Selthen had been given the pleasant task of teaching them what happened when vassal species forgot their place. When his censor officers reported an unknown fleet dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, Selthen barely looked up from his meal. "Scan them again," he said. "It is probably a sensor echo from the asteroid belt." It was not a sensor echo. 812 human warships emerged from FTL in a staggered combat formation, their shields already powered and their weapons systems hot. The fleet fanned out across the system's outer boundary like a wall, and at its center, the USS Steadfast held position with the quiet confidence of a flagship that knew exactly what it was doing. Selthen finally put down his food and walked to the bridge. He stared at the tactical display for a long moment, watching the red dots multiply as more and more unknown ships were confirmed. Then he did what every Veilthari commander did when faced with something they did not understand. He demanded surrender. His broadcast was standard Imperial protocol, a harsh, clipped message ordering the unknown fleet to power down weapons, lower shields, and prepare to be boarded. The penalty for refusal, he added, was immediate destruction. The response came back in perfect Veilthari common tongue, so clean and properly accented that several officers on Selthan's bridge assumed it was coming from another Imperial ship. "This is Admiral Kevin Holt of the United Earth Naval Command. We are here on behalf of the civilian populations of the Morellian worlds. You will stand down your blockade, permit humanitarian aid vessels to pass, and withdraw to neutral space. There will be no second warning." Lieutenant Danny Greer, who had transmitted the message from his station on the Steadfast's bridge, leaned back at his chair and let out a slow breath. His hands were steady, but his heart was beating fast. He had just spoken the first official words between humanity and the galaxy's largest empire, and he had done it in their own language. He hoped he had gotten the accent right. On the Wrath of Sovereignty, Selthan stared at his communication officer as if the man had grown a second head. An unknown species, speaking Veilthari, issuing demands to the Empire. It was so absurd that Selthan actually laughed. Then he ordered his fleet into attack formation and fired. 200 plasma torpedoes streaked across the void toward the human fleet. They crossed the distance in seconds, bright blue streaks of superheated energy designed to melt through hull plating like fire through paper. They struck the forward shields of the human cruiser line and detonated in a wall of light that momentarily blinded every optical sensor in the system. When the light cleared, every human ship was still there. The shields had held. Not a single vessel had taken damage. Commander Beckett's voice came through the bridge speakers on the Steadfast, calm and measured. "All sections report shields holding. No damage across the fleet. Enemy torpedoes were standard plasma yield. Our shields can handle at least 4 more volleys at this intensity." Admiral Holt stood at the command rail and looked at the tactical display. 150 Imperial warships were accelerating toward his fleet, weapons firing. Behind them, 3 worlds full of starving people were watching the sky and wondering what was happening. They had chosen to shoot. "All battle groups," Holt said, his voice carrying across the fleet-wide command channel. "Weapons free. Execute Battle Plan Alpha. Keep it clean, keep it tight, and watch each other's backs." The human fleet moved. It did not move the way the Veilthari expected. Imperial doctrine was simple. Line up your ships, concentrate your fire, and overwhelm the enemy with volume. Every species the Empire had ever fought used some version of this approach. It was the only way to fight a space battle, as far as anyone in the galaxy knew. Humans had a different opinion. The fleet split into 5 independent battle groups, each one operating under the command of a captain who had the authority to make decisions without waiting for orders from above. Captain Nora Whitfield took the carrier group wide, swinging around the flank of the Imperial formation. Captain Greg Dawson drove his destroyers straight up the middle at full speed, drawing fire and attention. Captain Tyrone Marshall positioned his cruiser division on the opposite flank, where the Imperial formation was thinnest. Selthan saw the human fleet splitting apart and assumed they were breaking. He ordered his ships to pursue the largest group, concentrating his entire force on Dawson's destroyers. It was exactly what Holt had wanted him to do. Dawson's destroyers were fast and agile. They dodged and weaved through the incoming fire, their point defense systems swatting down torpedoes, while their electronic warfare suites filled the Veilthari targeting systems with false signals. Selthan's gunners were shooting at ghosts, wasting ammunition on phantom targets, while the real destroyers danced just out of reach. Then Whitfield's carriers launched their strike craft. 300 unmanned attack drones poured out of the carrier bays like a swarm of angry hornets, each one small, fast, and carrying enough firepower to crack a frigate's hull. They hit the rear of the Velthari formation from an angle that Selthan's ships could not cover without turning away from Dawson's destroyers. Within minutes, a dozen Imperial ships were burning. Before Selthan could reposition, Marshall's cruisers opened fire from the opposite flank. Electromagnetic railguns, weapons the Empire had never encountered, accelerated solid projectiles to a fraction of the speed of light, and sent them punching through Velthari hull plating like needles through cloth. The impacts were devastating. Imperial warships that had been built to withstand plasma fire were being torn apart by simple kinetic force. The battle lasted 40 minutes. It felt like 40 hours. Commander Beckett coordinated everything from the Steadfast's Combat Information Center, feeding real-time data to every ship in the fleet through a networked command system that allowed the entire armada to see, think, and react as one. When a gap opened in the Imperial formation, she saw it before Selthan did, and directed ships to exploit it. When a human destroyer took heavy damage, she rerouted support before the captain even called for help. By the end, 63 Velthari warships were destroyed, and 41 more were drifting without power. The rest were running. Selthan's flagship was captured intact, after a boarding action led by Marine Colonel Patricia Vance, whose teams cut through the ship's internal defenses in 8 minutes, using breaching tactics that were fast, precise, and non-lethal. Selthan was found on his bridge, standing alone, staring at the tactical display that showed his entire fleet gone. Human losses across the entire engagement were 11 wounded and 0 killed. Admiral Holt wasted no time. The moment the last Imperial ship was neutralized, he ordered the humanitarian convoy forward. Cargo ships loaded with food, medicine, water purifiers, and emergency shelters moved through the wreckage of the blockade and entered orbit around the 3 Morellian worlds. Within hours, supplies were landing on the surface. Human soldiers, sailors, and medics stepped onto alien soil for the first time in history, and instead of planting a flag, they handed out food. On the Morellian homeworld, a young amphibian child, who had not eaten in 3 days, looked up at the tall, strange creature kneeling in front of her. The creature had 2 eyes instead of 6, skin that was smooth instead of scaled, and it was smiling at her in a way that needed no translation. She took the food, and for the first time in months, she was not afraid.